In the dim solitude of her tiny dorm room, Diana sat perched on the edge of her creaky bed, staring at the withering rose she had placed in a glass of water. It wasn't just a flower, but a fragile reminder of the fleeting moments of beauty in her otherwise harsh reality. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and cleaning detergent, the remnants of the hurried scrubbing she did when she first moved in. Outside her thin walls, her roommates' raucous laughter and boisterous voices filled the halls, but Diana preferred the quiet confinement of her room. Here, she could avoid the awkward encounters and probing questions that reminded her of her place as an orphan thrust into a world that offered little comfort. The government stipend she received, though appreciated, barely covered the essentials. Most of it had already been fixing the leaking sink and a broken lock on her door, a necessity in a building where trust was as brittle as the rotting window frames. As the last of her funds dwindled, the reality of her situation pressed down like an iron weight. She needed a job, quickly, but the prospects for someone like Diana, without a formal education or connections, were disheartening. She pored over the classifieds in an old newspaper she found in the dormitory common area. Job postings filled the pages, but most demanded qualifications she didn't have or hours she couldn't sustain. She circled a few ads with hopeful hesitation before one particular listing caught her eye. A local business center was hiring a janitor. The pay was modest, but it seemed like a lifeline for someone in Diana's position. Better yet, the center was within walking distance, saving her the bus fare she couldn't afford. A flicker of hope sparked in her chest as she imagined the possibility of steady work, no matter how humble. It wasn't the dream life she had once dared to imagine, but it was a step toward stability, and that was enough. With trembling hands, Diana pulled a few pieces of clothing from her battered suitcase, searching for something suitable for an interview. Each item bore the marks of her modest past, faded seams and hand-stitched patches, but they were clean and neatly pressed. She chose a simple blouse and a knee-length skirt, then washed her face in the communal sink down the hall. Looking at herself in the cracked mirror, her reflection showed a woman whose eyes held weariness and quiet determination. "This will have to do," she whispered, smoothing her hair into place. Tomorrow, her future awaited. Not the one she had dreamed of as a child, but one she would have to build with her hands, brick by brick. The following morning, Diana set off toward the business center. The streets were still damp from the night's rain, and the cool air carried a faint smell of asphalt and morning dew. As she walked, her mind raced with scenarios, questions the manager might ask, how she would respond, and whether her lack of experience would instantly disqualify her. She clutched her small purse tightly, feeling the comforting weight of her identification papers, and forced herself to take deep breaths. The business center loomed ahead, its sleek glass facade glinting in the sunlight. Compared to the crumbling dorm she called home, it looked like a palace of opportunity. Diana hesitated before stepping inside, feeling like she didn't belong in such a polished place. The receptionist, a well-dressed young woman with perfectly styled hair, glanced up from her desk. Diana noticed how her tailored blazer fit her figure flawlessly, a stark contrast to Diana's thrifted blouse. "Good morning. I'm here about the janitor position," Diana said, her voice wavering slightly. The receptionist offered a polite smile and gestured toward a small seating area. "Please wait. The manager will be with you shortly." Diana sat on the edge of a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The minutes stretched, and her nerves grew heavier with each passing second. She glanced around at the sleek decor, a vase of fresh lilies, minimalist art pieces on the walls, and a large clock that seemed to tick louder the longer she waited. Finally, a man in a neatly pressed suit appeared, carrying a clipboard. "Miss Diana?" he said, his tone formal but not unkind. "Yes, that's me," she replied, standing quickly and smoothing her skirt. "Follow me, please." He led her to a modest office at the end of a corridor. The room smelled faintly of leather and wood polish, and a framed picture of a family rested on the desk, a detail that momentarily softened Diana's tension. The manager, Mr. Graves, introduced himself with a firm handshake and motioned for Diana to sit. "Thank you for coming in today," he began, his voice steady and professional. "We're looking for someone reliable, detail-oriented, and willing to take initiative." The position is to maintain the cleanliness of the building, which includes the lobby, offices, and occasional event spaces. Does that sound like something you're comfortable with? Yes, sir, Diana answered, her voice more potent than expected. I may not have formal experience, but I'm a hard worker and learn quickly. Mr. Graves nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. He asked a few more questions about her availability and stamina for physical labor. To Diana's relief, the conversation flowed smoothly, and she relaxed slightly. Finally, Mr. Graves closed his clipboard and smiled. We'd like to offer you the position. You can start tomorrow. We'll provide a uniform for the first week and train you on the specific tasks. After that, you'll work independently. Does that sound good? Yes, thank you so much, Diana said, barely able to contain her relief. A quiet sense of pride settled in her chest as she left the office. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't just a job. It was the beginning of something better, a chance to reclaim a small piece of control over her life. Across town, privilege and indulgence existed in contrast to Diana's struggles. Ethan Carter, the heir to a thriving corporate empire, lounged in his high-rise office, surrounded by luxury. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, but his attention was fixed on the glass of whiskey in his hand. He was a man who had never known scarcity. His every desire was met without effort. Yet, beneath his cocky exterior, there was a restless dissatisfaction he couldn't quite name. Ethan's office buzzed with activity as employees bustled about, their conversations a constant hum of strategy and deals. Ethan, however, was far removed from the day-to-day grind. He had inherited his position as head of a major department, but his role often felt more like a figurehead than a leader. His father, Richard Carter, oversaw the company with an iron will, leaving Ethan free to indulge in his whims. Today, those whims involved his two closest friends, Luke and Ryan, who had dropped by unannounced. The trio sat in Ethan's office, laughing over old jokes and reliving their days of carefree debauchery. You know, Luke said, leaning back in his chair, this view would be even better with some entertainment. How about a little wager? Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What kind of wager? Luke pointed out the window to the parking lot below, where an elderly janitor was slowly sweeping debris into a pile. See that guy? I bet you $1,000 you can't make him fall with the roar of your car engine. Ryan laughed, already pulling out his wallet. I'll double that bet. $2,000 says he goes down like a sack of potatoes. Ethan smirked, the thrill of the challenge lighting up his eyes. You're on. Grabbing his car keys, Ethan led the way to the parking garage. His sleek sports car, a symbol of his wealth and status, sat waiting. He revved the engine loudly, the deafening roar echoing through the space. Below, the janitor startled and stumbled, falling awkwardly onto the pavement. From above, Ethan and his friends burst into laughter, amusement filling the air. Easy money, Ethan declared, pocketing his winnings as they returned to his office. But the laughter died the moment Richard Carter appeared in the doorway. His imposing figure cast shadows over the room, and his piercing gaze instantly silenced the trio. What the hell is going on here? Richard demanded, his voice cold and sharp. Luke and Ryan exchanged nervous glances before slipping out of the room, leaving Ethan to face his father's wrath alone. You think this is a game, Ethan? Richard thundered, slamming the door behind him. You're sitting up here, drinking and making bets, while this company struggles to secure contracts. Do you even understand the damage you're causing? Ethan was caught off guard and tried to deflect. It's not a big deal, Dad. The market is full of opportunities. We've got a $300 million deal on the table. Enough. Richard interrupted, his face red with anger. You've already lost 2 major contracts because of your incompetence. This company will be ruined if you don't pull yourself together. Ethan's usual confidence wavered under the weight of his father's fury. For the first time in years, he felt like a child being scolded, powerless to defend himself. I'm trying, Dad, he said quietly, his voice unsteady. Trying isn't enough, Richard shot back. You're my son, Ethan, and I expect more from you. Your mother, and I worked too hard for this family to watch you throw it away. Richard's tone softened, but his disappointment was unmistakable. And when are you going to start thinking about your future? Find a wife, start a family. Time isn't on your side. Ethan didn't respond, frustration and shame swirling inside him. His father's words echoed in his mind long after Richard left, leaving Ethan alone to confront the mess he had made of his life. Diana arrived at the business center early on her first day, her nerves a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She wore the crisp uniform provided by Mr. Graves, a simple blue blouse and black slacks. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like armor to Diana, marking the beginning of a new chapter. Her initial tasks were straightforward: dusting the lobby, mopping the marble floors, and wiping down the large glass doors that framed the entrance. The rhythm of the work was soothing, almost meditative. Ariana felt an unfamiliar sense of pride as she moved through the quiet hallways. For once, she wasn't just surviving. She was contributing, earning her way. Yet, the business center was a microcosm with a social hierarchy as sharp as its glossy architecture. The office workers, dressed in tailored suits and pencil skirts, moved with purpose, their conversations peppered with jargon Diana didn't understand. They barely noticed her, which suited her just fine. But not everyone was indifferent. The receptionist from her interview, Cassie, greeted her warmly each morning, often slipping her a piece of gum or asking about her day. A security guard named Joe also offered her a small smile whenever they crossed paths during his rounds. These small acts of kindness gave Diana a sense of belonging, albeit tentative. However, not all interactions were so kind. A few employees whispered behind her back, their eyes darting toward her as she worked. Diana overheard fragments of their conversations, mocking her for being just a cleaner or speculating about her life outside the center. She tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the satisfaction of seeing the building sparkle under her care. Diana's first real test came during a corporate event in the Grand Conference Hall. Mr. Graves approached her during her afternoon shift, his expression neutral but firm. "We have a big event tonight, and I'll need you to stay late to clean up afterward. It's extra pay if you're willing," he said. Though exhaustion tugged at her, Diana agreed without hesitation. She couldn't afford to pass up the chance to earn more. That evening, after the event began, Diana waited in a small staff room with only a table and an old chair. She pulled out her well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, a book she had read countless times. The familiar words offered a brief escape from the noisy festivities echoing down the hall. When the event ended, Diana entered the conference hall armed with cleaning supplies. She expected the usual mess: spilled drinks, crumpled napkins, and scattered chairs. Instead, she found 3 men lingering at the room's far end, their laughter drunken and boisterous. Among them was Ethan Carter, his tailored suit slightly disheveled, his confidence radiating despite the late hour. Ethan glanced up and saw Diana. He nudged his friends, Luke and Ryan, and muttered something that made them laugh. Diana froze, unsure whether to wait or begin her work. Sensing her hesitation, Ethan gestured dismissively. "Go ahead. We're just wrapping up," he said, his voice slurred but commanding. Diana nodded, keeping her head down as she began to clean. The men returned to their poker game, their banter punctuated by the occasional clinking of glasses. Diana couldn't help but overhear fragments of their conversation as she worked. They were placing bets, first on trivial matters, then on something more sinister. Luke leaned closer to Ethan, whispering, "Bet you can't bring her to the next company party." Ethan glanced toward Diana, a smirk curling at the corners of his lips. "Her," he said, loud enough for Diana to hear. "Not my type, but sure. You're on." Her heart sank as their laughter filled the room. She didn't know exactly what they were betting on, but their voices' condescending tone was unmistakable. She gritted her teeth, willing herself to focus on her task. The next day, Diana tried to push the incident from her mind. She couldn't afford to dwell on the arrogance of wealthy men playing games with people's lives. However, as the hours passed, she noticed Ethan lingering more often in the lobby or passing by her station without reason. Finally, during her break, he approached her. His usual cocky demeanor was tempered, but there was a glint of calculation in his eyes. "Diana, right?" he said, leaning casually against the wall. She glanced up from her tea, nodding warily. Yes, Mr. Carter. Ethan, he corrected. I need your help with something. Diana frowned, unsure where this was going. What kind of help? There's an event coming up, a charity gala. I need someone to accompany me. It's just for appearances, nothing serious. I'll pay you well. Diana stared at him, her mind racing. It wasn't uncommon for the wealthy to hire people for such roles, but the proposition felt wrong. She had seen how he and his friends behaved the night before. I don't think that's part of my job, she said, her tone clipped. Ethan smirked, pulling out a wad of cash from his pocket and placing it on the table. $8,000. All you have to do is dress up, stand next to me for a few hours, and act like you're enjoying yourself. Her eyes darted to the money, then back to Ethan. The offer was tempting, more money than she could make in months. But how he spoke to her as if she were a pawn in his game filled her with anger. Sorry, Mr. Carter, she said firmly, standing. I'm not for sale. She walked away, leaving Ethan stunned. No one had ever refused him before, and her defiance ignited a spark of something unfamiliar, curiosity mixed with frustration. But Ethan wasn't used to losing. Later that day, he cornered Diana near the supply closet, his tone more insistent. Listen, he began, his voice low. This isn't just about the money. It's a chance to see another side of life. Get out of this place for a night. Don't be stubborn. Diana crossed her arms, glaring at him. And why do you care about my life? You don't know anything about me. For a moment, Ethan faltered. He realized he didn't have an answer. All he knew was that he hated being challenged, and Diana seemed immune to his usual charms. You're right, he admitted. I don't know you, but I'm offering you an opportunity most people would kill for. Think about it. With that, he left, leaving Diana torn between her pride and her need. The money could change everything. Repairs for her dorm, a cushion for emergencies. But at what cost? That night, she sat alone in her room, staring at the wilted rose in its makeshift vase. The decision weighed heavily on her, pulling her between practicality and principle. Little did she know that attending Ethan's proposition would set off a chain of events neither could foresee. The night of the gala arrived faster than Diana expected. Despite her reservations, the lure of $1,000 had proven too strong. The money wasn't just a luxury, it was survival, a chance to finally breathe without worrying about the next week's groceries or unexpected expenses. Diana's preparations were a far cry from the glamorous rituals she imagined other women attending the gala might have. She borrowed a dress from a thrift shop, an elegant but slightly outdated gown in deep sapphire blue, and styled her hair using tutorials she had watched on an old phone. The final result was simple, but as she looked at her reflection, she felt a glimmer of confidence. Ethan arrived in a sleek black car to pick her up. His tailored suit and effortless charm were intimidating, but he seemed momentarily stunned when he saw her. You clean up nicely, he said, his voice lighter than usual, though the teasing tone lingered. Diana frowned slightly, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. I'm not here for compliments, Mr. Carter. Let's just get this over with. Ethan, he corrected, gesturing for her to get into the car. The gala was held in a grand ballroom, its opulent chandeliers casting a golden glow over the elegantly dressed attendees. Diana felt out of place when she stepped inside. Her thrifted gown and self-styled hair contrasted with the designer ensembles around her. Ethan lightly touched her back, guiding her through the crowd with practiced ease. His friends, Luke and Ryan, spotted them immediately. Their smug grins widened as they approached. Well, Ethan. You did it, Luke said, his tone dripping with mockery. I didn't think you had it in you. Careful, Luke, Ethan replied, his voice cold but composed. You're speaking to my guest. Diana felt the weight of their stares, her discomfort growing by the second. She realized she wasn't just a guest but a prop in whatever game these men were playing. But she had chosen and resolved to endure the evening with as much dignity as possible. As the night went on, Ethan remained uncharacteristically quiet. He stayed by Diana's side, deflecting his friend's attempts to bait him into further bets or antics. Observing him closely for the first time, Diana noticed a subtle tension in his posture, as if he were wrestling with something he couldn't fully articulate. The breaking point came when Ryan, emboldened by too many drinks, approached Diana with a lewd comment and an unwelcome touch on her arm. Ethan reacted instantly, his voice sharp and commanding. "Back off, Ryan," he said, stepping between them. Ryan laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, Ethan. She's just the help, right?" Diana's face burned with humiliation and fury. He turned and left the ballroom without a word, leaving Ethan to face his drunken friends alone. The aftermath of the gala was worse than Diana anticipated. When she returned to work the next day, the atmosphere in the business center had shifted. Whispers followed her wherever she went, and the previously indifferent employees her with thinly veiled contempt. "They're saying she's Ethan Carter's new project," one voice murmured as Diana passed by. "She must have done something to get his attention," another snickered. The rumors were relentless, fueled by Luke and Ryan, who seemed to delight in spreading malicious stories about her. Every sideways glance and hushed conversation chipped away at Diana's resolve. Her colleagues, who had once shared friendly smiles and casual greetings, now avoided her entirely. Even Cassie, the receptionist who had been kind to her, seemed hesitant to make eye contact. The isolation was suffocating. The worst came during a break in the staff room when one of the junior employees, emboldened by the rumors, made an offhand remark. "So, Diana," he said, leaning against the counter with a sly grin, "what's it like being Carter's little charity case?" Diana froze, her hand tightening around the mug of tea she had just poured. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. Before she could respond, Martha, the senior cleaner who had been her mentor, stepped in. "Shame on you," Martha said, her voice firm and steady. "What business is it of yours? How does she earn her living? At least she's working hard instead of gossiping like a child." The young man mumbled an apology and quickly left the room, but the damage was done. Diana sat down heavily, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't do this, Martha," she said quietly. "I thought taking that job would help me, but it's only made things worse." Martha placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Diana. These people don't matter. You know who you are, and that's all that counts." But Diana wasn't sure she believed that anymore. Later that evening, Ethan appeared as she cleaned the lobby, his expression unusually serious. He had heard the rumors, and guilt gnawed at him. "Diana," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "I need to talk to you." She didn't look up from her work. "Unless it's about cleaning schedules, I'm not interested." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "I'm sorry for everything, for putting you in that position, for not stopping them sooner. I never meant for this to happen." Diana straightened, finally meeting his gaze. "You didn't mean for it to happen, but you didn't do anything to prevent it either. Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and feel everyone judging you? To know that people think you're less than them because of a lie?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I know I've made mistakes, but I want to fix this. Tell me how." "You can't," Diana said simply. "What's done is done." As she walked away, Ethan realized his careless actions had consequences he couldn't easily undo. For the first time in his privileged life, he felt the weight of responsibility and the desire to become a better man, not for himself, but for someone else. Ethan sat in his office, staring out the window at the city skyline, but his mind was miles away. Diana's words echoed in his head. What's done is done. She had every right to walk away, never to trust him again. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something foreign, shame. The life he had so carelessly lived, full of meaningless bets and shallow friendships, suddenly felt hollow. Luke and Ryan hadn't stopped pestering him about the incident at the gala. Their crude jokes about Diana pushed Ethan to his breaking point. One afternoon, they showed up uninvited, lounging in his office with their usual arrogance. "What's the matter, Ethan? Feeling sentimental about the cleaning lady?" Luke teased, kicking his feet up on Ethan's desk. Ryan chimed in, "You've lost your edge, man. First, you ditched the parties, and now this? What happened to you?" Ethan stood abruptly, his voice cold and steady. "Get out." Luke and Ryan exchanged surprised glances. "What?" I said. "Get out," Ethan repeated, his tone sharp. I'm done with your games, your jokes, all of it. I don't want people like you in my life anymore. Luke scoffed, grabbing his jacket. You're seriously cutting us off over some janitor? You've gone soft. Maybe I have, Ethan replied, his gaze unwavering. But at least I'm not a coward who hides behind cheap bets to feel important. Ethan felt a strange sense of relief as the door slammed behind them. It was as though shedding those toxic friendships had lightened a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. That night, Ethan went to his father, Richard, for advice. Their relationship had always been strained, built more on expectations than understanding. But now, Ethan was ready to face the man who had always been his harshest critic. Sitting across from Richard in the grand study, Ethan admitted, I've been selfish. I've wasted so much time on things that don't matter. And I've hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Richard regarded him silently for a moment before speaking. Self-awareness is a good start, Ethan. But words mean nothing without action. What are you going to do to make it right? Ethan hesitated, then said, I want to fix things with Diana. But more than that, I want to earn her respect. Not by throwing money at the problem, but by proving that I've changed. Richard's expression softened a rare flicker of pride in his eyes. Then do it. But don't expect it to be easy. The next day, Ethan began making changes. He contacted Graves, the business center manager, asked to meet with Diana. When Graves relayed the message to her, Diana reluctantly agreed, more out of curiosity than willingness to forgive. They met in a quiet corner of the lobby, where Ethan stood waiting, his hands nervously clasped. Diana, he began, I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to make amends. I've asked Mr. Graves to transfer me to the operations team. I'll be working under him, doing the same tasks you've been doing. I want to understand what it's like, even if it's just for a little while. Diana stared at him, incredulous. You're going to be a janitor? He nodded. If that's what it takes to prove I'm serious, then yes. She didn't know whether to laugh or be impressed. You don't belong here, Ethan. This isn't your world. Maybe not, he admitted. But it's a world I need to understand. I want to change, Diana, and I want you to see that I can. Her skepticism remained, but she saw a glimmer of sincerity in his eyes for the first time. Over the following weeks, Ethan's actions surprised everyone, including Diana. He donned the same uniform as the rest of the cleaning staff, tackling tasks he had never imagined himself doing, scrubbing floors, emptying trash cans, and polishing windows. His movements were clumsy at first, but he approached the work with genuine effort. The other employees whispered about the change, some mocking, others impressed. Ethan ignored them all, focusing instead on his goal. Meanwhile, Diana observed him from a distance, her guarded heart struggling to reconcile the arrogant man she had known with the one mopping floors beside her. One evening, as they worked side by side cleaning the conference hall, Ethan broke the silence. Do you ever think about what you'd be doing if life had been kinder to you? He asked. Diana paused, the question catching her off guard. I try not to dwell on what could have been. It doesn't change anything. But what if you could change it? He pressed. She sighed, leaning on her mop. I'd have gone to college, maybe studied literature. Books have always been my escape. Ethan smiled faintly. I can see that. You have the kind of mind that belongs in a library, not a broom closet. His words stirred something in her, a mixture of gratitude and unease. She wasn't used to compliments, especially ones that felt genuine. Their conversations grew more frequent, slipping into the quiet moments between tasks. Ethan began to open up about his struggles, admitting how hollow his life had felt despite all his privilege. I've had everything handed to me, he confessed one night, but none of it ever made me happy. I envied people like you who fight for what they have. Diana scoffed. Envy? That's a first. Most people pity me. I don't, he said firmly. I admire you. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her, and for the first time, she believed that he might genuinely be changing. As the weeks turned into months, their connection deepened. Ethan joined her on her walks home, carrying her groceries and asking about her favorite books. Diana found herself laughing more often, her defenses slowly crumbling. One evening, As they sat on a park bench under the glow of a street lamp, Ethan turned to her, his expression serious. I know I've made mistakes, Diana, but I want to be better, not just for you, but for myself. And I want to thank you for showing me what matters. Her heart raced at his words, but she masked it with a teasing smile. Don't get ahead of yourself, Mr. Carter. You're still terrible at mopping floors. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Fair enough. But maybe you can teach me. As they returned to her dorm, the distance between their worlds felt smaller than ever. For the first time in years, Diana allowed herself to hope, not just for a better future, but for the possibility of something more with Ethan. One crisp morning, Diana was meticulously polishing the glass doors at the business center when she noticed a familiar figure approaching. Richard Carter's imposing frame cut through the bustling lobby like a ship parting calm waters. He was the kind of man who commanded respect without saying a word, his silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes giving him an aura of authority. Diana froze, unsure why he was there. They had crossed paths only once before, during her interview for the cleaning position, and his presence now felt oddly personal. Miss Diana, Richard said, his voice steady and deliberate. May I have a word? Diana set down her cleaning supplies, her heart pounding. Of course, Mr. Carter. He gestured for her to follow him into one of the smaller conference rooms. The air inside was thick with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the faint hum of distant conversations. Richard motioned for her to sit, and for a moment, he simply studied her, his expression unreadable. I've been observing my son, he began, his tone a mixture of curiosity and resolve. And I believe I owe you an apology on his behalf. Diana blinked, startled. An apology? Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on the table. Ethan has been reckless and thoughtless, but I've seen changes in him lately, changes I didn't think he could. And I suspect you're the reason for that. She shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Mr. Carter, I don't think I've done anything. You've done more than you realize, he interrupted. Which is why I've come to make you an offer. The position of head of technical staff at this business center is available. It's a role with more responsibility, better pay, and an opportunity to prove your potential. Diana's breath caught. She wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. Head of technical staff? Richard nodded. You've shown diligence and integrity, which are sorely lacking in many. I believe you'd be an asset to this organization. She hesitated, her mind racing. The offer was tempting, but it also felt overwhelming. Mr. Carter, I'm grateful, but I don't have the education or experience for a role like that. I'm just a janitor, he finished, his tone sharp but not unkind. Nonsense. Everyone starts somewhere, Miss Diana. I started in a mailroom before building this company. If I can do it, so can you. His words struck a chord, but doubt still lingered. What about Ethan? Won't he think? Ethan will understand, Richard said firmly. This isn't about him. It's about you. Think it over, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often. With that, he stood, leaving Diana alone with her thoughts and the weight of his words. Later that day, Diana was pacing in her tiny dorm room, replaying Richard's offer. She glanced at her reflection in the cracked mirror, her uniform a reminder of where she had started. Could she step into a role of such responsibility? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. When she opened it, Ethan stood there, a sheepish smile on his face. Hey, he said, holding up a small bouquet of wildflowers. I thought these might brighten your day. Diana raised an eyebrow but couldn't suppress a smile. Wildflowers? Is this your idea of an apology? Part of it, he admitted, stepping inside. The other part is me finally listening to what you've been trying to tell me. She crossed her arms, intrigued. Oh, and what's that? Ethan took a deep breath, his usual bravado replaced with sincerity. That I can't keep living the way I have. I've been so focused on myself, on what I thought I deserved, that I never stopped to think about the people I've hurt, or the things I've missed out on. Diana softened, her walls beginning to crack. And what do you plan to do about it? I've already started, he said, his voice steady. I've cut ties with Luke and Ryan. I've been working alongside the cleaning staff, learning what it means to earn respect rather than demand it. And I've been thinking a lot about what I want my life to look like moving forward. She studied him carefully, searching for any hint of insincerity. But all she saw was a man trying to piece himself together. Ethan, she said finally, if you're serious about changing, it has to be for you. Not for anyone else. Not even for me. I know, he replied. But you've shown me what real strength looks like, Diana. And I don't want to lose the chance to be someone worthy of standing beside you. Her heart ached at his words, a mixture of hope and fear swirling inside her. She wanted to believe him, but the scars of his past actions ran deep. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan continued to prove himself, not with grand gestures, but through consistent effort. He took on extra shifts, helped his coworkers without being asked, and even attended workshops to learn skills he had previously dismissed as beneath him. Diana, meanwhile, wrestled with her decision about Richard's offer. She sought advice from Martha, the wise senior cleaner who had become a surrogate mother to her. Take the job, sweetheart, Martha urged. You've earned it. Don't let fear hold you back. With Martha's encouragement, Diana finally accepted the position. On her first day as head of technical staff, she walked into the business center with her head held high, determined to rise to the challenge. Ethan was the first to congratulate her, and his smile was genuine. I knew you could do it, he said, his voice filled with pride. Let's see if you can keep up, she replied teasingly. As their professional lives intertwined, so did their ones. Ethan continued to earn Diana's trust, one small act at a time, while she inspired him to become the man he had always wanted to be. Together, they began envisioning a future where their partnership wasn't just about redemption but building something meaningful, one step at a time. Weeks turned into months, and the transformation within both Diana and Ethan became undeniable. Diana had fully embraced her role as the head of technical staff. She organized schedules, oversaw maintenance projects, and even implemented small but impactful changes, like updating the break room and advocating for better working conditions for the janitorial team. The respect she commanded wasn't demanded, but earned through hard work and compassion. Employees who once dismissed her as just the cleaner now came to her for guidance, recognizing her strength and fairness. Ethan, meanwhile, had settled into a rhythm that felt entirely foreign but deeply fulfilling. He had transitioned from the janitorial team to assisting with building operations, proving himself capable in areas he had once overlooked. The lessons he learned from Diana, humility, perseverance, and empathy, shaped his approach to work and life. As Diana and Ethan walked home together one evening, the conversation turned reflective. You've come a long way, you know, Diana said, glancing at him. The old Ethan Carter wouldn't have lasted a day scrubbing floors. He chuckled, running a hand through his hair. The old Ethan Carter didn't know what he was missing. Honestly, I've never felt more alive. Diana smiled, but there was a weight behind her expression. Do you ever think about going back? To your father's company, I mean. Ethan paused, his steps slowing. I do, he admitted, but not as the man I was. If I ever go back, it'll be on my terms, with purpose. I want to build something real, something that matters. And what about us? She asked, her voice soft but steady. He stopped walking and turned to face her. You're my future, Diana. Whatever I build, I want you by my side. For a moment, neither spoke, the quiet hum of the city filling the space between them. Then, slowly, Diana reached for his hand. Then let's build it together, she said. Diana's promotion and Ethan's steady growth didn't go unnoticed, least of all by Richard Carter. One morning, he called Ethan to his office, his tone neutral but his expression unreadable. Ethan, Richard began, folding his hands on the desk, I've been watching you, and I have to admit, I'm impressed. You've shown responsibility, maturity, and, most importantly, humility. Ethan raised an eyebrow, unsure where this was going. Thank you, Dad. But I didn't come here to ask for my old position back. I know, Richard replied, and that's why I'm offering it to you. Ethan blinked, taken aback. What? Richard leaned forward, his gaze piercing. The company needs someone with vision, someone who understands people, not just numbers. You've proven that you're capable of leading, Ethan. But I'm not just handing it to you. You'll work your way up, starting as a junior executive and earning every step. Ethan considered his father's words carefully. And Diana? Richard's expression softened. I've already spoken to her. She's an integral part of this company now. If she wants to grow here, she'll have every opportunity. Later that evening, Ethan shared the news with Diana as they sat on the stoop of her dorm building. The faint glow of the streetlights cast soft shadows across their faces. Do you think I should do it? He asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Diana studied him, her gaze steady. That depends. Are you ready to face the pressure and expectations? Because if you're not, it'll crush you again. I think I am, he said. But only if you're with me. Diana smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan. If this is what you want, then I'll support you every step of the way. In the following months, Ethan rejoined the company, tackling his new role with a determination that surprised even his father. Diana continued to excel in her position, finding fulfillment in the work and the respect she had earned. Their relationship flourished, rooted in mutual growth and trust. Ethan proposed during one of their walks through the city, kneeling in the park where they had shared their first kiss. I don't deserve you, he said, his voice trembling, but I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your love. Tears welled in Diana's eyes as she nodded. Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times, yes. The wedding was a modest but joyous affair, attended by their closest friends and colleagues. Even Richard, who rarely showed emotion, offered a heartfelt toast, expressing his pride in his son and the woman who had changed him for the better. Ethan and Diana's journey was far from over, but they faced the future with hope, determination, and the unshakable belief that they could overcome anything together. Their story became a testament to the power of transformation, not just of circumstances, but of hearts and lives, and a reminder that even the most unlikely connections can lead to extraordinary new beginnings.